Love was a band from Los Angeles that had its heyday from 1966 to the early 70s. It released 7 studio albums during that time and enjoyed only moderate commercial success. However, the band's third album, Forever Changes, changed the course of music. Forever Changes was recorded in just 64 hours during the Summer of Love in 1967 and disappeared almost without a trace after its release on November the 1st, 1967. What might have been a case of love in vain turned into a whole lot of love, as Forever Changes has since gone on to become one of the most praised albums in the history of music.
Well, I remember when you used to look so good and I did everything that I possibly could for you.
Thanks ever so much for watching. If you're really into production, please go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list, and you can download a whole bunch of free goodies. Please check out the other videos in the series. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Love's Forever Changes has been described as the best pop album ever, one of the best and most highly regarded and influential rock albums of all time, the greatest album ever made in LA, one of the finest and most haunting albums to come out of the Summer of Love, the second greatest psychedelic album of all time, and more. Jimi Hendrix was a fan. The Doors were fans, as were The Clash. Robert Plant was and continues to be a fan, and he's covered several of Love's songs. In 1988, the Stone Roses and their producer John Leckie bonded over their agreement that it's the best record ever. Love Forever Changes is consistently included in lists of the greatest albums of all time. For example, it appeared at number 11 on Mojo's 1996 Readers list, at number 6 on New Musical Express 2003 lists, and at 180 on Rolling Stone's 2020 list. In 1998, Q magazine readers voted Forever Changes the 82nd greatest album of all time. Forever Changes was also mentioned in the 2005 book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. In 2008, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. And in 2011, it was added to the US Library of Congress's National Recording Registry. So how did a relatively obscure American band find so much international love and affection? And why did the world go crazy over this Love album in particular? Forever Changes is a striking amalgam of electric and acoustic instruments. It's dominated by acoustic guitars, strings, horns, and also features flute, harpsichord, piano, and so on. At the same time, it has a strong rock influence with screaming electric guitars. It's been called a psychedelic folk rock album, and has also elements of hard rock, jazz, soul, and Latin. Today, the album would be categorized as orchestral or baroque pop. The songs often don't conform to traditional verse-chorus structures, and there are many unexpected chord changes and melodic turns. The lyrics have a stream of consciousness quality and a sense of unease and foreboding that's at odds with the drug-infused flower power optimism of the era. In fact, during the writing and recording of the album, the main songwriter, Arthur Lee, thought he was going to die soon. He envisioned Forever Changes as his own epitaph. The result has been dubbed dignified paranoia. Perhaps it was part of Lee's attempt to have a stab at eternity. There are very few of the typical 1960s studio trappings on Forever Changes. No backward tracks, no excessive phasing, delays, or reverb, no weird panning, no electronic instruments, no mellotron, and so on. It makes the music sound out of its time and, well, more forever. Arthur Lee, the band's guitarist, singer, and main songwriter, was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1945. And grew up in Los Angeles. He started recording in 1963 with the bands The Lags and Lee's American Four. In 1964, he wrote and produced a single called My Diary by singer Rosa Lee Brooks that featured an unknown guitarist called Jimi Hendrix. Soon afterwards, Lee watched the Byrds performing and, inspired by the band's folk rock direction, decided to form yet another band. Enter Brian McLean. At the time, he was a roadie for the Byrds. A Los Angeles native, McLean was a singer and guitarist who played folk and blues. McLean and Lee joined forces in a group called The Grassroots, which also featured lead guitarist Johnny Eccles, bassist Johnny Fleckenstein, and drummer Alban Pfisterer. In 1965, the band changed its name to Love. Love soon started attracting attention in the local music scene, and of Jack Holzman, founder of the Elektra label, which signed them. He recalls, "I went to see them at a Los Angeles club, and they were the oddest band I'd ever seen, but I was gripped by their music. I'd never done rock and roll, but particularly the way they covered Hey Joe really attracted me." Soon after signing, the band recorded a self-titled debut album, released in March 1966, which was strongly influenced by the Rolling Stones and the Byrds, and reached number 52 in the US charts. The first song, an energetic version of the Burt Bacharach song, My Little Red Book, was released as a single and reached number 57 in the US charts. The album was produced by Holzman together with Mark Abrahamson, known for his work with Judy Collins and the Paul Butterfield Band, and engineered by Bruce Botnick. Botnick "We recorded Love's first album at Sunset Sound on a 4-track in just a couple of days, which was not unusual at the time. After that, Jack went to New York. I mixed the album and sent him the mono and stereo masters." Artists released albums very quickly in those days, and Love were no exception. The band's second album, Da Capo, saw the light of day the same year. The band had by now expanded to a 7-piece, with Pfisterer moving from drums to organ and harpsichord, and the addition of new members, saxophonist Tejay Cantrelli and drummer Michael Stuart. Da Capo was produced by Holzman and Paul Rothchild. The latter had worked with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and The Doors, and later went on to work with Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, and many others. Da Capo only reached to number 80 on the US charts, but it did contain Love's biggest single hit, 7 and 7 Is, which went to number 33 and was much later covered by Robert Plant. In those days, long pieces were de rigueur, and Love did not want to be left behind. And so the album's centerpiece was a 19-minute long psychedelic jam called Revelation. In 1967, at the height of the hippie era and in the middle of the summer of Love, Love made their great leap forwards. How did a talented but underachieving bunch of musicians suddenly go from good to exceptional? Stronger still, how did the band manage to do this with omens that were not good at all? For reasons that are unclear, after the Capo album, 2 musicians, keyboardist Alban Pfisterer and saxophonist Tejay Cantrelli, left the band. Meanwhile, reportedly through excessive drug use and band infighting, the remaining musicians were demoralized, and they had a 22-year-old leader who thought he was going to die soon. In short, by the spring of 1967, Love as a band were not exactly in great shape. However, label manager Jack Holzman wasn't ready yet to give up on the band and asked Bruce Botnick to produce their third album. Botnick had not only engineered the first 2 Love albums, but also just been involved in engineering 3 of the most seminal albums to come out of the 60s. The Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, The Doors' self-titled debut album, and Buffalo Springfield's second album Again, which featured Neil Young and Stephen Stills. Holzman understandably hoped that Botnick would be able to weave some magic. When Botnick connected with Love, he found an eager Lee. But when he visited a rehearsal, he judged the band listless and uninspired. Botnick recalled, "I suggested to Arthur Lee the Wrecking Crew, who were the top band that backed everybody in town. We put some sessions together, 4 members of the Wrecking Crew came down, and the band sat on the couch in front of the console. Arthur went out into the room with Johnny and they played acoustic guitars with the Wrecking Crew members. They recorded 2 songs in 3 hours. As intended, this ended up being motivational for the band. I swear I saw tears, but Johnny said this wasn't the case. After the date, they said they wanted another shot at it." The first session took place on June the 9th, 1967, and featured Wrecking Crew members keyboardist Don Randy, guitarist Billy Strange, bassist Carol Kay, and drummer Hal Blaine. And the 2 songs that were recorded were And More Again and The Daily Planet. Neil Young also reportedly was part of the sessions, but decided that he preferred being an artist to being behind the glass even before he attended a rehearsal. Further sessions took place at Sunset Sound Recorders in Hollywood, with the last session on September the 25th. The elaborate string and horn arrangements on Forever Changes are one of the album's most striking features and were recorded on that last date. Botnick recalls that he had drafted in an arranger during the summer, to Lee's great enthusiasm. At the time, said Botnick, radio wasn't narrowcasting like it is today. Where today you have a rap station, you have an R&B station, you have a rock station, you have an oldies station, you have a news station. In those days, you'd have KFWB or KSJ, and they would play everything. You would hear Love followed by Frank Sinatra, going into How Much Is That Doggy in the Window. It was totally a mixture of music. So everybody that was making records at the time was competing on the same field. And then it would go into Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. So there was an amalgamation, a synergy actually, between all of the different musical styles. The arranger who Botnick contracted was called David Angel, and the producer commented, Arthur Lee really warmed to it, and he sang all the lines to David Angel, all the string lines, all the brass lines, everything. It's a really weird mix of Tijuana Brass and the rock and roll he was coming from. It was what Arthur heard in his head. This wasn't a matter of hiring an arranger to come up with arrangements without the artist's involvement. Although more tracks were recorded, 11 made it to the final album, with a total length of 42 minutes. All but 2 songs were written by Lee. The 2 remaining songs, Old Man, the album opener, Alone Again Or, which became the most famous song, were written by Brian McLean. On its release on November the 1st, 1967, Forever Changes was largely met with indifference in the US, reaching only 154 on the Billboard chart. The worst result of the 3 Love albums so far. The album did have some traction in the UK, where it reached number 24. The reviews at the time of release were moderately positive. And despite the fact that many musicians admittedly loved the album, Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix were reportedly 2 of several celebrity fans, it's hard not to suspect that it was all just a bit of a disappointment for Lee and his band. The band duly fell apart. McLean left of his own accord and Lee sacked the rest of the members. Lee reformed Love and recorded 3 more albums with a new lineup. For Sale in 1969, Out There also in 1969, and Full Start in 1970. The music was much more rock and blues based than on Forever Changes, and Jimi Hendrix even made an appearance on one song on Full Start. However, only For Sale has been regarded as anywhere close in stature to Forever Changes. In 2014, New Musical Express ranked For Sale as number 1 of the list of 101 albums to hear before you die. This lineup of Love also quickly fell apart, and Lee went solo, recording a solo album called Vindicator in 1970. The Love moniker probably still sold more records because he recorded a final Love studio album with session musicians, Reel to Reel, in 1974, but that was more influenced by funk and soft rock. He would not release anything until 2009 and 2012, respectively called Love Lost and Black Beauty. This was the end of the road for Love. Arthur Lee spent the late 70s, 80s and early 90s in and out of the public eye, releasing some solo albums but also caring for his father and withdrawing for long periods of time. In 1996, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison for a firearms charge, but was released in 2001 when the prosecutor of the trial was found guilty of misconduct. In 2003, Lee went on tour with a new version of Love called Love with Arthur Lee for a Forever Changes 35th anniversary tour that started in the Royal Festival Hall in London. Original guitarist Johnny Eccles was part of the lineup. The stop-start nature of Lee's activities in these years was due to a large degree to the fact he suffered from acute myeloid leukemia. Several benefit concerts to help him pay for his medical bills were set up, including a concert on June the 23rd, 2006, in the Beacon Theatre at New York, featuring Robert Plant, Ian Hunter, Ryan Adams, and Nils Lofgren. Lee died on August the 3rd, 2006 at the age of only 61. Brian McLean had predeceased him on Christmas Day, 1998, from a heart attack in a restaurant while being interviewed for a book about love. So how did the world eventually find love? The band's music never really went away, and over the years, word of mouth spread amongst music lovers about a fairly obscure but brilliant album that sounds like nothing else and was arguably ahead of its time. Perhaps the world wasn't ready for Forever Changes in the era when it was made and released, and the world only gradually changed enough to recognise its greatness. Jazz Holtzman recalled, "I saw The Independent do a review of the 20 greatest albums of 1967, with Love at number 1, above The Doors and Sgt. Pepper's. That was just wonderful. The album is embraced because it deserves to be embraced. Bruce and I were like diamond cutters. We were trying to get every edge we could and to get it as perfect as we could." When asked for his opinion, Bruce Botnick reflected, "It's the words plus the music and the performance. There hasn't been anything like it since. Nobody has even gotten close. It's the uniqueness of Arthur's wit and Brian's sensitivity. Arthur was a cornucopia. He kept on giving." Certainly the lyrics on Forever Changes were at odds with the hippie-esque cuteness and optimism of the era. Talking about the fact that he thought that this was his last album he'd ever make, Lee once explained, "The words represented the last words I would say about this planet. I made it after I thought there would be no hope left in the world." And so his lyrics are a mashup of the personal and the political, with humorous and perhaps drug-inspired lines like, "The snot has caked against my pants. It has turned to crystal. There's a bluebird sitting on the branch. I think I'll get my pistol," in the song Live and Let Live. But there's also strong political commentary, for example in the song A House Is Not a Motel. "By the time I'm through singing, the bells from the schools of wars will be ringing. More confusions, blood transfusions. The news today be the movies for tomorrow, and the waters turned to blood." As Botnick noted, there's a running commentary on the state of society throughout the album. I think that's one of the reasons that the music has proven to have legs. It's the depth of the words. You can hear it and you immediately relate to it. It doesn't matter about the age group or ethnicity. In addition, there's a rap by Lee on the 7-minute album closer, You Set the Scene. It may be one of the first ever raps recorded, once again putting Lee ahead of his time. Most of all, of course, there's the music. One critic wrote, "More than Sgt. Pepper's or any album from that era, Forever Changes gains stature with every play. It's a record that weaves its magic with every listen. You can play it, be mesmerised, and then immediately play it again and be equally mesmerised all over again as new facets take hold. Forever Changes was already at the time beautifully produced and still sounds great today. It contains a rich tapestry of sounds that perfectly complements Lee's slightly eerie voice. In a 2018 Deluxe 50th Anniversary edition, which was released on Rhino, remastered by Botnick, it reveals the album in all its glory more clearly than ever before. And the additional tracks and liner notes illustrate many hitherto unknown aspects of the creative process during the sessions. There's also the last album Lee ever released during his lifetime, a 2003 live recording of the whole of Forever Changes called the Forever Changes Live Concert. It features Lee in excellent and quite surprising form, given his 6-year stint in prison. The live album also adds power and passion to the occasionally twee nature of the original. Both the live album and Rhino Anniversary editions are essentially additions to the Forever Changes canon. They contribute to the fact that today, 54 years after Forever Changes was recorded, the album is still widely enjoyed and discussed. As has aptly been written, Forever Changes sounds as visionary now as the day of its release. It's ideally suited for all times of crisis, lyrically poetic and orchestral in its arrangements. The record was a window into the future. Thanks ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Please check out the other videos in the series. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to leave us any comments and quotes. I was very, very blessed to meet Arthur just before he died. I had a friend that was touring with him. It was huge. Growing up in the UK, if you're my kind of age group, Gen Xer, and you were into like punk and new wave, 80s and 90s music, all of the bands, every band we knew, name-checked the band and this album. This album is hugely important. So if you haven't already, please go and check it out. Love Forever Changes. An absolute masterpiece. Thank you, Arthur Lee. Thank you, Brian McLean. Thank you, everybody that made this beautiful piece of music.